Next up is Amir Hartman. He is an author and a consultant that specializes in technology transformation. He is the author of Competing for Customers, which many of you in the room have this book from us today. And he is going to talk about a major trend affecting stakeholder value chains, including the subscription economy. So with that, let's welcome Amir.
Hey everybody, so we got 45 minutes until we got some goodies, is that right? Okay, all right, I'll try to be entertaining. So let me share with you a little bit about the journey of the book that we just finished. We finished it a couple months ago. It was a lot of fun. I worked with a couple of colleagues of mine, Craig LeGrand, who's a partner of mine, and Jeb Dastile, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Oracle. And we did a lot of research. It was very much focused on B2B. Now, I think a lot of the concepts that you'll find in the book and a lot of concepts that we'll talk about now are very appropriate for B2C. But this is a very specific book geared towards B2B leaders. So let me kind of frame what we have here. A couple of thoughts. I want to get just a couple quick questions before I get kicked off. I'm assuming everybody here is, B2B companies. Is that right? Show anybody B2C? Okay, so all B2B. Second of all, how many of you are in the marketing space within your organizations? So most of you. What about services, sales, and other? Finance? Finance? Okay. Now, with respect to the marketers here, quick show of hands, would you say that the majority of your attention, and by attention I mean time and resources and capital, is spent on acquisition or retention? Who says acquisition of new customers? Okay, what about retention? Show of hands. Okay, so split. What about both? Okay. And then the last question is, how many of you would say you know from your top 100 customers the value that you have delivered for them in a quantifiable way? Show of hands. Top 100 customers, you can right now list off the return on investment or the value that they've achieved. Okay, so this is a major point I want to focus in on today. So a couple of thoughts. And we're kind of talking about the Amazon effect. Certainly we all have experience with Amazon, other online consumer-oriented applications that we are very familiar with, whatever it may be, whether it's Yelp or whatnot. And Amazon to me is a metaphor, but also has some interesting applications. Certainly what we're seeing is that irrespective of the impact it's had in the consumer landscape, it's inevitably bled into expectations that your customers have of you in the B2B space. How easy it is to deal with you, what their experience is. So that's very, very relevant. And it's certainly changing the value chain itself, or if you want to call it the value delivery system, because each part of that system has bled and has those same kind of expectations. So a couple of interesting facts, and I think some of the questions were brought up a little bit earlier. Number one, if you B2B focused, the number one reason customers leave, so for customer churn, is they do not perceive value from your solution. That's the number one reason. It's not the only reason, but it's the number one reason. Secondly, we talked a little bit about this in the end of this last discussion. Customers are having multiple interactions with you. In fact, they touch you 11 times before they buy in some fashion. And it costs over 6 times to acquire a new customer than it does to retain an existing one. That's a huge point that we'll segue into a little bit. And then lastly, to the point that we think touched on just before I started talking, was that 70% of the sales cycle is complete before they engage with a salesperson. So we need to start thinking about Can we influence what's happening in that 70% time that they haven't yet engaged with us in a sales discussion? How can we influence it? So customer experience is a big way, right? It's a term that we hear a lot. If I ask CEOs who cares fundamentally about their customer experience, every single one will raise their hand. And I'm sure you guys do. Who has a customer experience program in place right now? Show of hands. And who intends to have a customer experience? Okay. So absolutely, there are benefits, and it's shown very much in this case, for example, that there are indeed benefits. It is an answer. If you can show that you can change the customer experience in a positive way, there are benefits. And you can see those folks on the left, over an 8-year span, have reaped some benefits versus their peer group. So it's an answer. But during the research that we had for the book, we did a survey. We surveyed about 100 B2B providers. This ran the gamut. This wasn't, because it's Oracle co-author, it wasn't technology companies necessarily per se, but it was 100 B2B providers. These were VPs of marketing and sales, and we asked them a few questions related to how engaged they are with their customers. Number one, we asked them, do you think that your organization understands your customers' goals and strategies? And they were like, yeah, we're good at that. Do you quantify the value you deliver? Now, you guys were at least honest about it, because nobody raised their hand. I think Mun was kind of, almost raising their hand. But these guys, 60% said they did. Do you collaborate with your customer on sales goals? Sit down with them, plan, here's my goals, here's what I'm trying to accomplish with you, how do we get this done together? And do you work with your customers to help in the adoption and the achievement of the full potential of your solution? And they were, for the most part, yeah, we do. Now, the flip side in the gray is what the customer actually said. So obviously there's a gap. And not only that, the gray was actually, we asked the customer for your most strategic B2B vendors. Not, because some of them have hundreds of vendors. You can imagine a GE's got hundreds of vendors. We asked for the most strategic, your top 10 vendors that you would consider strategic. And that was their answer. So obviously there's a big gap happening. And we think this gap is pretty significant. Okay, here we go. So this is a key chart. It says a lot. I want to try to highlight a few elements here. This is not just software, right? Obviously, the subscription business has been around for a while, right? Whether it's media, entertainment, we all know subscription as consumers. Netflix, as an example, right? And certainly in the B2B space, there's a move that's been afoot for a number of years already. The cloudification of business, software as a service, certainly has led the way. But we believe that almost every single industry is being impacted or will be impacted by this move. In other words, the shift from atoms and molecules to services, used when they want, how much they want, and pay for what they want. We believe that that's happening across the board. Now, some industries faster than others. In this world, there's a lot of changes that are very significant and that materially impact what you do as a marketing leader or as a sales leader and other parts of the organization. So the left side is sort of the old world. That's the CapEx world. The CapEx world was you have a product or a solution, your customer cuts you a check for the vast majority of the total cost. Typically 75, 80% of the total cost, day one. There's obviously other costs, implementation costs, upgrade costs, enhancements costs, whatever. I mean, new feature costs. But the vast majority of the total revenue you're going to get from that customer happens on day one. The new world is very different. And customers don't want to take on that risk because the risk in the old world was squarely on the customer. They cut you a big check in the hopes someday down the road, 18 months, 24 months, that they are going to achieve value that hopefully covers the cost magically. That's changing, and it's changing very rapidly in almost every single industry. And that today, they're not willing to do that anymore. And that's because of Amazon and Netflix and others, and SaaS. But they want to pay for bits and pieces. They want to pay as they go, pay as they use, only use what they want. And that changes the risk equation in a huge, huge way. It puts the onus on you. Now, in this world where 70% or more of the total revenue that you're going to get from a customer happens post-initial sale, this is huge. So in that kind of a world, retention is king. You absolutely have to retain your customers and make them happy, or you're not going to achieve the expected revenue. This is a huge, huge change. And so if you're a marketer, think about, well, we did a show of hands, looked like it was evenly split between marketers saying, I focus most of my attention on new customer acquisition. Others said, I focus most of my attention on customer retention. Irrespective of where you sit on that fence, you have to understand this equation. And if it's not there today for you, it's going to be. So the question is, if I am acquisition focused today, how do I and should I reallocate my attention given this fact? The other critical point is that happiness or customer experience in that right side world where the risk is on you and customers can leave easier and they want to see value, is that the experience that is non-negotiable has to be the achievement of business outcomes. Right? So that's the main theme of the book. You absolutely have to do whatever you can to increase the likelihood that the customer is going to achieve business outcomes. We're not selling features and functionality. We are selling business outcomes. Right? So that exercise you guys just did now is very valid. You start thinking of the different, and I'm using customer in a broad sense. There's different stakeholders. What is a good business outcome for those business stakeholders? And can I influence, can I help increase the likelihood that they will achieve those business outcomes, and how? So this is just a symbolic picture of how we tend to, the acquisition process in most organizations is pretty darn complicated. The retention piece, we think it's a lot simpler, but we're making a point now that, hey, you really need to make sure that those customers who are trying to stop from leaving and reduce churn are achieving value. So it's not that picture anymore. Oops, sorry, let's go back. Think about some of these functions or capabilities in your organization may be called something different, but think about, again, inside sales and marketing typically are new acquisition focused. Now I'm not saying don't focus on acquiring new customers. Of course we have to focus on that. But start thinking about existing customers and what does acquisition mean with an existing customer base. Customer references or customer content or content marketing, whatever you want to call it, that is typically a function that is very much a marginalized function, goes with hat in hand, begging for money and begging customers for stories or videos or quotes or whatever. It's not a good position to be in, begging a customer or sales for attention. Customer advocacy, whether it's NPS, satisfaction surveys, those are strong, those are good. Those are great ways to listen to customers, but they're also, again, a little bit on the reactive side. So what we're saying is you have to get much more proactive in the achievement of business outcomes that your customers are going to experience. So that's the key takeaway. So this is our definition of customer success. And again, customer success, how many have heard of that term before? How many have customer success organizations? Okay, typically, it's a very popular organization in SaaS companies. But it typically is focused, and even some of the software companies have customer success folks, it's typically almost always renewal focused. I gotta renew, it's a renewal exercise. Contract time is up, I gotta renew, that's that, and they're comped on renewals. So we're saying that customer success is really those activities, those initiatives that you bring to your customers and stakeholders that's going to materially impact the likelihood that they will achieve desired business outcomes. You want to call it ROI, whatever the metric is. And there are 3 pillars to doing so: listening, engaging, and ensuring. Listening, most organizations do a reasonable job in listening. You probably have many listening posts across the journey of the customer. Some of them are surveys, maybe they're executive to executive meetings. It could be QBRs that you do, perhaps, with a customer. But the point is, think about what that customer journey is with you. From acquiring the solution, to implementing the solution, to using the solution, to achieving results from the solution, and all the other journeys that they go on. And they have different needs and experiences throughout that journey. Are you listening effectively throughout that journey? With the advent of the industrial internet, or the Internet of Everything, or whatever terminology you want to use, and the advent of smart products, you can now, in many cases, start listening to the performance of your products and solutions in real time. Engaging is about collaboration. It's about working hand in hand with your customer to understand what they're trying to achieve. It's about becoming a partner to them. It's about being a thought leader. It's about building a joint solution to achieve their strategies, not the product or solution that you have that's cookie cutter, that you think the value proposition is. And then ensuring is the toughest one. And there's very, very few companies that do this. We're pretty good at articulating our value proposition, but we are not very good at making sure our customers are achieving the value proposition. How many of you do look-backs? Right? We asked the question, I expect no hands raised. You don't know the ROI, but how many of you actually proactively go out and measure the value achieved that your customers have? Show of hands. Can you give me an example, what you guys do? Excellent. Yes?
We're an electrical distribution firm, and we do business with 60% of the large global agreements. And one of the things that these global accounts ask us to do is every year or during contract negotiations is provide them with cost reductions. Our approach to that is we have a value creation team that reports into me, and they go out to our global account customers, do search for savings events, for instance, Boeing, and they'll identify an opportunity for a particular plant to save a certain amount of electricity by upgrading to more energy efficient lighting. And then we actually have the plant manager sign a document that says Wesco did this. So when we go to negotiate the contract, and procurement is asking us to take a couple % off the price of our product, we say, well, we could do that, or we saved you in the last 3 years $10 or $12 million in these value adds.
Exactly. And that's a huge, I mean, it's a side benefit to doing so, right? You know, the sort of protection against commoditization and, you know, price protection as well. But probably even more important than that, you can have dialogue, strategic dialogue with executives at the customer. Yeah. That's very different than just selling a product.
The number one thing that it does is our sales reps have a tendency to network lower in the organization. And when a plant's looking at spending $1 million or more to upgrade a lighting system in a large plant, it gets us at the plant manager levels, CFO, financial, a lot higher level than what we typically operate at.
Exactly. Exactly. So those are great, great examples. I strongly encourage you to think a little bit about what you could do, what would be worthwhile doing around quantifying and communicating the value you're helping your customers achieve, because it's very, very powerful if you can do that. You can build relationships that you didn't otherwise have. You can protect against commoditization. You can start selling higher up in the organization in larger deals. You can create marketing content that is customer relevant, that speaks in a language that the customer actually cares about. Right? Because if you're, you know, if let's say you're a Cisco, which is one of the companies we studied, you know, customers don't care about routers and switches. I mean, maybe some folks in the IT space do. What they care about is achieving certain business goals. And so when you're marketing, you need to think about that audience, that customer, or the different stakeholders, and you have to speak the language that's they're gonna actually care about. And there's a lot of other things that happen in Insure that can increase the likelihood, right? So things like adoption. How well are my customers actually adopting my products and solutions? Can I help them with any adoption challenges they may have? Or can my partners, my ecosystem help them? So let me give you sort of 3 quick stories. These are all in the book. Anybody heard of Telogis or Telogis? They are a mobile asset management company. Let me kind of call them something like that. They basically have solutions, software, that is able to track mobile assets. These are typically larger assets like truck fleets, large equipment, construction equipment, for example. So imagine if you are a construction company, wouldn't you like to have really clear visibility and real-time visibility into how your cement trucks are performing? Are they getting there on time? So we don't have to pay overtime, for example. Are my drivers driving safely? This Telogis company has access and visibility to the kinds of indicators and performance that these large assets have. And that's what they provide. So the GMs now, the Volvos, these large manufacturers of large vehicles are actually now taking that Telogis solution and making it part of their truck during the sale. So they're a really good example of listening. Right? Listening, not just by talking to a customer, but listening to the actual performance of the asset. So think about, are there opportunities for us to somehow get insight to the performance of the customer's asset or our asset and how they're using it, how it's performing? Can we extract some of those data and package it up in a value-add way? Cisco is an interesting case. I mean, you know, a strong company, been around for a while, in the tech leader. They are undergoing a big transformation right now, and they're trying to get away. They're still known as a networking company, but they're trying to get away from that a little bit, and they're really starting to engage with customers in a very more strategic way. They're trying to have dialogue and be a thought leader around what does digital strategy mean? How can we at Cisco help you with your digital strategy without even saying the word router or network or switch? So they're really talking about business transformation in a digital way. And they're calling on CFOs and other CX senior executives at their customers and having these strategy planning sessions, workshops, discovery workshops, coming up with a digital strategy, key initiatives. They're going to help them implement and measure the value. So this is a way that they're trying to engage at a very, very different level, right, to the point a little bit earlier. And then GE, and specifically GE Power, they're experimenting with a few pretty radical ideas. You know, they historically have sold, let's say, as an example, turbines to energy companies, to utilities. And they still do that. But what they're doing now is they're starting to experiment with not selling a turbine, but selling the reduction of energy, the cost of energy. You know, similar to the example you gave. So they're literally experimenting with how do we price our ability to lower the cost of energy production rather than just selling a turbine. Now, I'm not saying GE is moving across the board swiftly and all their businesses are going in this direction, but it is very much something that's happening at Power and some of the other larger businesses, and I think it's going to be something that we see more and more of. Then the question is, if they start selling business outcomes, there's a lot of stuff that has to come with it. Who's assessing the achievement or realization of business outcomes? Is it GE? Is it the customer? Each have its own biases? Is it a third party? If you've got partners in your value chain or your value delivery system, can you count on them to do a quality job so that the customer is actually achieving business value? These are non-trivial questions. Do I need to train them to think in this fashion? Today, my channel partners know how to sell products the way I kind of do, maybe not as well. My Cisco channel partners, I mean, Cisco's salespeople are cash registers. They are, you know, every week I'm going to hit my numbers, and they're really good at selling products. Channel partners are even more cash registers. They're order takers for the most part. So in a world where you want to have more strategic dialogue and engagement with the customer, what does that mean for your channel partners? Are we doing on time? Okay, good. Okay, so this is, kind of long story short, we see that the economics of doing customer success well, right, helping them proactively along the journey that they take to increase the likelihood that they're going to achieve business outcomes. If you do that effectively, that this is the potential benefit to you. And I'll talk about the first one, because the first one is I think most important. We talked about how retention is king, right, in the beginning. Let me give you an example. And obviously your pricing models may be different, but here's how retention economics can work. When you are in a renewal and annuity business, as a service, things like that, If you take two companies have the same number of customers, they start off with 600 customers, they sell the same solution at the same price. One has a retention rate, customer retention rate of 95%, the other has an 80% retention rate. Over a 3-year, and this is a $1,000 a month product, over a 3-year span, there is a $2+ million delta on the revenue front between the two, just on existing customers. Not talking about upsell, cross-sell to existing customers. They acquire the same number of companies or customers every year. They sell the same product at the same price. One has better retention than the other. That's why it's critical. And profit pool, your core profit pool, is coming from your core existing base for the most part. This was the Oracle example, so we obviously had to study Oracle as well. Oracle's been on a journey for about 10 years to become a much more customer-centric and much more focused on customer success. They are not the first company that you think of, if you know some of the technology players, as customer-focused. It's not like, you're the first one that's going to raise their hand. They've been, known as harsh, tough negotiators, really hard sellers, never giving an inch. And I think the tide started to turn when they acquired PeopleSoft a while back. And they're obviously a very acquisitive company. And they've gotten into the cloud business in a big way. In fact, today about 95% of all their products are cloud ready, cloud enabled. And they've realized through these acquisitions and the culture of these companies that they needed to change. And so through some of the efforts on the right, and starting to care about the value that their customers are experiencing and achieving, you can see the delta between those customers that they focused on versus ones that are more transactional, just kind of buy stuff from Oracle. Now, this has been a 10-year journey. This is not a quick fix. Now, you can define the customer journey however you want. So this is our feeble attempt at defining customer journey. I strongly encourage you to lay out a map of what your customer journey looks like, and I'm sure there was multiple journeys that exist. But think about, let's assume that these are the steps that a typical customer goes through. Think about what you could do to move the needle in terms of their likelihood of achieving business outcomes or success in each of these steps. Right, so there's, the questions, embedded in the questions are ideas or thoughts. And again, obviously most people here are from marketing, but if you're in different functional areas, think about what that could mean in terms of how I would do things a little bit different. If I truly believe in what he's saying, that retention is absolutely critical, that I really need to start thinking about how I can influence the likelihood of my customer success, what would that mean in terms of what you would do differently tomorrow? Okay, a few key takeaways, then we can get into a discussion. So, customer experience, CX, customer experience is great, but it's not enough, right? So one key takeaway in the book is the one experience that we have to nail is the customer's achievement of business outcomes. Because if they don't, they're likely to leave and go elsewhere. We have this in software, it's classic, right? But I'm sure it's other industries as well. There's this almost presumptive thinking that if they buy my supply chain solution and they implement it, they're going to achieve business value. We know that's not the case. In fact, less than 14% of technology solutions actually achieve the full potential of the technology solution. Secondly, identify areas in that customer journey where you can move the needle, okay? Where you can increase a little bit the likelihood of their success. Think about the customer experience programs and the customer-facing programs that you have today, and ask yourself in a somewhat sarcastic tone, do these programs truly benefit the customer, or are they benefiting me? And a lot of programs that are sort of customer success oriented or customer experience oriented or customer marketing oriented are for our benefit. Get serious about value realization. Find a way to quantify and communicate the value that you're helping your customers achieve, and have that dialogue. It's not something that can happen tomorrow, but there are some tremendous steps you can take that are not that complicated that really can change the nature of discussions you have. And then lastly, we know that, again, we talked about listening posts. Most decent-sized organizations have many, many listening posts. Careful to just listen and not act, right? It's important that we take action from what we hear and discover from customers and communicate what action we're taking.